All right. Hello, everyone. I'm privileged to start this amazing day full of positive presentations about tech. I'm going to present you a topic which is related to startups. And the title of it is How to Build the First Version of the App the Right Way with MVP. So to start with a couple of words about myself. I'm Szymon Soppa, and I'm a CEO and co-founder of Curiosum, which is a software house located in Poznań, so it's like a local company. And we do web and mobile apps. Our main technology that we use are Elixir and React. And also, personally, I'm a web developer. So I developed around 20 applications that were production-ready apps. Some of them grown into big companies. Some of them failed. So most of these were startups at the beginning. And the startup word is pretty crucial here because you cannot talk about MVP if you don't include startup. And I'm going to start with one assumption here that many of you probably here are a part of a startup. So what is the question that most of the startup members ask themselves? Is the startup that I founded or work for going to succeed? And it's a pretty crucial thing to answer yourself because, well, there are a couple of reasons why you might join a startup, and if it's gonna fail, you're not gonna get any rewards from it. So why is it worth to join a startup? If you join it at the very early moment, you're gonna play a big role in the company if it's grown. You're gonna learn at much higher pace because that's the dynamic of a startup. It's growing fast, and well, it comes with the benefit of learning at a very high pace. And as a result, if the startup succeed, you're gonna earn more because, well, you're gonna play a big role in this company. And yet there is one big issue with the startups, and it's that 90% of these startups fail. So it's important to know whether there is potentially a possibility of the startup to succeed in the future. And there are some effects of a startup failure. So 90% of the startup fails eventually, but 100% of these people lose a job. So it's like 100% and 90% of the startups. That's a lot of people losing a job at some point. So there are a lot of very intelligent people that create such a startups. So there is also a loss of human potential in there and lots of good ideas, because it's not like every of these startups has a bad idea and that's why they fail. I would say that on the contrary, there are a lot of startups that have a good idea, but they fail due to wrong execution. And of course, there is a loss of capital because, well, most of the startups are like VC-backed startups, or they just raise a lot of capital from external companies. And I mentioned to you that I'm running a software house. I mentioned to you that I'm a developer, but I didn't mention to you that I actually had a startup story in the past, and it was called Mateby. So what was a Mateby? It was an event discovery app, and we only created it for Android. Because there were 3 of us, me and 2 of my friends. It took 3 years to develop it all, and it had almost 20,000 downloads in Google Play. So you may say that for some reason, it could have been successful. 20,000 downloads, it's not that bad. In some industries, you would say that it's like it might be a success. It might be a success story. Like in B2B businesses, 20,000 downloads might be enough to say that it had its success. But yet, the result it failed. So why did we fail? There was a bad business model, which means no profitability, which means no money. There was a lack of good growth engine, and as a result of these two, there was a loss of motivation. So I know a thing or two about failure in a startup. So in most cases, when a startup fails, you would hear from the startup owners, the founders, that, yeah, but we learned a lot. So it failed, but I know much more. I know how to build a company now. I would say it's not the case. And I would say that this approach that you expect the startup to fail and learn a lot is not a good idea. So I would say, don't think like this. Don't think like the purpose of creating a startup is to learn a lot. Remember that 100% of these people lose a job at some point if the startup fails. So I would say that the proper approach here is to say, I built a startup with the best possible approach, but failed to find a product market fit. And that's basically what I will try to explain to you today, because I believe there is a proper way to run a startup. There is a proper way to create application, because we are, well, in tech event, we're gonna talk about applications here. There is a way to create the first version of the application in a startup to maximize the chances for success. And your goal should be to know it, how to do it. Your goal, and I don't mean only the founders, I mean everyone who are involved in a startup. So if you're a developer, you're obligated to also grasp this knowledge and to help other people in the company to make it work. So my assumption that most of you might be a part of a startup at the beginning doesn't come with no explanation. And to briefly explain why, let's focus on what is a startup. So a startup is a human institution established to create a new product or a service in conditions of extreme uncertainty. So this extreme uncertainty part is important here because you create a new product or a service, so you don't know if it's going to succeed. However, what I would like to point here more is that it's a human institution established to create a new product or a service, which means that there are two cases here. First of all, it might be a new product or a service in a small, medium, new company. And second of all, a startup can create a new product or a service in big established company. So you can call a startup like a group of people working in a corporation that their goal is to bring a new product or a service to the market. And if it's a new product or a service and they don't have a proper data on it, so it's like they operate in an environment of extreme uncertainty, then it means that they are a startup as well. So if you didn't consider yourself as a part of a startup, maybe you will now. And there are three elements of a startup. There is a product or a service that we bring into market. There is a business model, and there is a growth engine. So basically, a growth engine is how people find out about this app. And business model is how do we make money on it? Because the goal of every startup is to find a profitable business model. That's the first thing that they have to think about when they start the startup. Okay, so why did we go through all of this knowledge? Because creating a first version of the app is mostly a startup's domain. And we can now finally move to app development process. And this app development process is the one that I would say I mostly see when I work with the startup founders. And for some reason, I consider this process as not the optimal. So every startup founder starts with idea, and that's like very obvious. Then they raise a capital, and the capital here might be either money from external investors, their own money, or just the time that they can spend on creating the application. Then there comes building the team part, and it's either in-house team or outsourcing company or freelancers. It doesn't matter. It's just building the team. Then here comes the choosing the features for first release. We define the functional requirements in the third point, but now we're going to choose the features that we can do with the budget and the team that we gathered. And the rest of the features we're going to move to backlog after the first release. So then comes the building application, and then comes the release. And the last point in this journey is the feedback and further development of missing features. And I consider this last point as the problem here, because, well, most of the companies will do this last point when their almost whole budget is gone. So they will focus on building this app. They're going to focus every step, but the last point, the feedback from users, is at the end, and they have little to no money to actually do it properly. And to give you an idea of what I mean is, I will give you an example of a company failing process that I took part in as a developer. And in particular, I joined this project when it pivoted. So it started as an idea. It took 2 years to develop the first version application. And the problem here is that there was no verification in this 2 years period. So that was just developing an app, no verification, and then here comes the feedback. And it turned out that users don't really understand what this application is doing. So the founders decided to pivot, to change the whole idea behind this application. And here comes the part where I come in, and I helped develop this new version of the app. The problem was that they still didn't do any verification at all, and it took like more than a year. So in total, you can say that the whole development process took like 3 years, and there was no feedback, verification, nothing at all. And guess what? It failed, because it turned out that users still maybe don't understand it, they don't use it, and the founders like lost a lot of money on it. So how to not do it this way? How to make sure that users will like this product? And here comes the MVP. So MVP is minimum viable product, or in other words, you can say that it's a product of minimum value. And I consider this as a way to maximize your chances of success in a startup environment. MVP is also a part of something called lean startup methodology. And it was first defined here. And the author of this methodology is Eric Rice. You can read his book, Lean Startup. I strongly recommend it if you're interested in this topic. He was a part of a startup called InView that implemented this methodology and had a huge success with it. At first, their app didn't seem like it's gonna work, but after years of improvements, it turned out that they had this thing that users really liked, and eventually this app is like a couple of millions users. So I strongly recommend this. And the definition of MVP is minimum viable product is the simplest thing you can give to the very first set of users to test your assumptions. So the problem of many companies is that they are not trying to create the simplest thing. They are trying to create the whole big product. And then they're gonna try to introduce this product to the global market, not like a local market, not like a specific targeted users, but the global market. And MVP is a totally different approach. It's like the simplest thing. you can give to the very first set of users to test your assumptions. So did this startup that I briefly mentioned a couple of slides ago deliver a simple thing? No. It took 2 years, 2 or 3 years actually, in development to create a couple of iterations, but it wasn't like a simple thing. It was a ready product with no verification. And I would like to give you a couple of ideas, a couple of examples of MVPs that were done properly, even though maybe the authors of these startups didn't actually consider this as an MVP. It was an MVP. And they made a huge success with it. So the first example is something that you must know. It's Dropbox MVP. So you may think that Dropbox started as a full big product, but it didn't. What the founder did was just a simple sign-up page on the website where you could leave your email and you would sign up for a beta version once it's done. And you could also watch a video explaining the product. So it was a video plus sign-up page for beta. So users didn't even have the possibility of using this product. It was like watching the very small MVP and being able to sign up. Right now, of course, this is a very big product, but at that time, it allowed the founder to verify if users actually are interested in this type of product. So it's like the simplest thing he could give to the very first set of users. Then here comes the Groupon MVP. So did you know that Groupon was just a WordPress website where the founder would post coupons on the website and you could subscribe, and then the founder would send you an email with a PDF coupon. And the funny thing here is that he would have to send it manually from his email client. So it was like a very simple thing, website based on WordPress plus manual sending of emails. It's like $30 per year or month of cost to verify the assumptions. So again, this is the simplest thing he could do to verify whether there is actually interest in this kind of service. Then comes a Zappos MVP. So Zappos is a big company right now. They sell shoes online and they employ more than 1,000 people. And the founder would start with a very simple solution, which is taking a picture of a shoe in a shop and then posting it on a website. And if someone would be interested in this shoe, he would sell it to this person, but he would have to buy it first in the store. So he didn't even have a store to keep these shoes in a place, but he would have to buy it in a shop. And the last example is pretty funny because this is an MVP by a Twitch founder, and it was called a Justin TV. And the Justin TV was like a 24/7 reality show of Justin life. So it's like a very funny thing, but at the same time, it allowed him to verify the assumption that people are actually interested in watching the real life of people and streaming. So eventually, it's a product that offers you a streaming of mostly gamers, but it started like this. And there are countless examples of companies that did go through MVP stage. And I would encourage you to take a look at the webarchive.org website, where you can find almost any website in the internet, and you can see a historical version of this application. You can, for example, take a look at the Facebook early days, Airbnb, Twitter, or you can, for instance, take a look at the applications on your local markets. So like, I don't know, Allegro or any other company that you feel like had a success and have a success. And you may ask yourself, how did they start? What was the first version of the app that they created? And there is also one key lesson from the examples I just gave to you. It's that you might not need to code to create an MVP, because as I said, MVP is all about verification of hypothesis. And if you can do it without the code, it's fine. So nowadays you have a software like, for example, mockups.com. You can create a mockup version of the app. You can design interactions between these mockups, and you can just record a video of this product and try users to subscribe to beta, just like Dropbox did. So nowadays, you wouldn't have to write a single line of code to create something similar to Dropbox case. So keep it in mind. But if you need to code, because I'm not saying that's always the case, but if you need to code, choose the tech stack that allows you to develop fast. That's at least my perspective. Because with MVP, you have to act fast. It's about fast verification of idea. And that's why we follow this path so far at Curiosum. And our tech stack is ready for this kind of cases. We use Elixir, which is a great language for fast MVP development. But also, once you get out of this MVP stage, it offers you also great scalability. So it's like, from my perspective, a great language that has it all when it comes to all app development stages, both MVP and scale. And then React and React Native, because it allows you to create multi-platform application like web and mobile apps at one code. So it, again, speeds up the process of app development. It allows you to create iOS and Android version of the app fast, and the time thing in MVP is crucial. And what is the typical cycle of MVP? Because when you talk about MVP, we talk about cycles. So there is a build stage, then we go to measure, and then we go to learn. And if each of these cycles is a new hypothesis. So we have a hypothesis that given set of features are gonna work for users, are gonna be, let's say, valuable. So we build these features, then we check whether users are interested in it, and then we learn from it. In the learn part, we try to come up with new ideas and build new things and measure it again. And that's the cycle that we follow. So in case of Dropbox, you would build this video and this sign-up page. You would measure how many users are interested in this product, and then you would learn from it. It turned out that a lot of users were interested, but if they wouldn't be, then you would create another version of the app, you would create another video, and then you would try to sign up more people just to see if they're more interested. So why MVP? As I said, it's about validating the idea, because founders have a lot of assumptions about the idea. You can't say that your idea is perfect until you validate it. So this is the first thing in MVP. Second of all, it's about focusing on features you really need, because there are a lot of features that you probably don't need and you still implement it. As the effect, you spend less time on development, which means less costs and faster validation of idea. So there are also reasons why when you might not need MVP, because there are some let's say there are some businesses that are, for example, highly regulated. It's like banks, insurance. It's hard to create MVP in these places. You need to follow regulations. It's very hard to design some of the MVPs, because MVP doesn't have to be only the app. It can also be applied to different businesses. So imagine that you want to create a rocket like SpaceX, right? You cannot design a rocket as an MVP. It's not gonna work. So these are the types of businesses that cannot follow this idea. And there is also biotech, for instance. So there are some businesses where MVP is not gonna bring much value, But for most of the businesses, I would say this is the right approach for developing an app. So now I'm going to present to you an example idea of how you can follow the MVP in your project and to maximize your chances for success. So we still start with idea. It's not like it's gone. Okay, so we have to have an idea, and I will give you a quick quote from Steve Jobs here because I found it interesting. It kind of resonates with what I think about MVP. You should not start with technology and then figure out how it fits into user needs. Instead, you should start with user needs and figure out the right technology to satisfy it. If I change it a little bit, I would say you should not start with the idea and then figure out how it fits into user needs. Instead, you should start with user needs and figure out the right solution to satisfy it. So it always should start with user needs. It's always the case. And how do I find this kind of problems? How do I find the problems that people, not users, have? First of all, be just open to listen, because people talk about problems every day, and they like to share it with other people on forums or social media. And there's one thing that's pretty important here. It's that if you can find early adopters, which are the people who are gonna try your first versions of the product, your product probably doesn't solve real problems. So if you say, okay, I have an idea, I probably also have an app, small app, I can't find users to test it out, it probably means you don't solve a real problem. So when you come up with a given idea, think about the problems it solves. That's the first thing you should start with. Then we define the budget counted in months of development. So as I said briefly before, the budget might be a capital from investors, VCs, angel investors, crowdfunding. It can be also your own savings, and it can be also your own time, because some startups are based entirely on the time that founders are willing to invest. So once you have this budget counted in months, then you go to deciding on a realistic length of build, measure, learn cycle, which is the cycle in MVP. So you have to have an idea of how long this cycle will be. And the goal here is to make it as short as possible. So one tip here might be to say it's gonna be 3 weeks. And now with that assumption, you try to match the features you're gonna implement into this 3 weeks period, okay? So you have to have an idea of how fast you can develop the things in a cycle to verify the assumptions. And you have to focus only on priorities here. You're not gonna develop anything more than what's required to verify the idea. Then you go to the fourth point, which is divide the budget by the length of a cycle. So you have a budget, you have this realistic length of a cycle, you divide it, and what you get is the number of MVP iterations you're gonna build. So it's not about creating an entire product anymore, it's about creating as many iterations of MVPs you can squeeze. So building MVP is all about iterations. And the more iterations you can squeeze into the budget, the more verification you get, and therefore you get more chances for success. And that's the most important thing I'd like you to remember after this talk, is that you don't focus on this big product anymore. You're focusing on building as many iterations as possible. That's where the chances for success comes in. And that's where I see potentially that we can reduce this 90% of failing rate into something lower. Okay, then we go to defining the essential functional requirements for a cycle and hypothesis verification. So each MVP cycle has its own hypothesis, and you should not do more than what's required to verify it. And the last point is fast verification. So I would say that before the cycle ends, you should already have a group of users, early adopters, willing to test your product. Okay, so don't think about finding these people once you're done with the MVP iteration. Find them sooner, because it's all about the time. It's all about reducing the cost, reducing the time spent on features development. So you have to have these users sooner than the cycle ends. And here are a couple of questions you can ask the early adopters. Do you understand this product or service? Is it intuitive? Would you pay for it? Because eventually you want to make money on this product. What do you dislike in it? So at the end, it's all about repeating the point 5, which was defined as essential functional requirement for a cycle, and point 6, which is fast verification. And you do it until you run out of budget. Okay, you do it until you have no more money or time. And at this stage, at the end, you should be able to answer yourself questions whether you have a good product or a service, a good growth engine, and a working business model, which essentially means that whether your startup is profitable or not. So if I summarize the MVP here, it's all about validating hypotheses. You should not implement features in a cycle that are not required to validate hypotheses, because it's all about doing it as fast as possible. And cycles should be fast. Verification phase should be fast. So it's not only about creating this product in a cycle very fast. It's also about doing the verification part very fast, because you want to get into the next cycle as soon as possible. And MVP doesn't have to include coding. It's not the case for every MVP, but for some of the MVPs, it might be the case. Okay, and